Child labor was widespread in the United States economy until the 1930s. Child laborers suffered through harsh conditions through injury by manual and tedious labor, loss of education and often disease from unsafe work sites. Children in the workforce also had very low wages.
Child labor began because factories and mills needed people to work for them that accepted decreased wages, increased hours, and people with small hands to work the mills.
In 1880, 32.5% of males aged 10 to 15 and 12.2% of females aged 10 to 15 were in the labor force. Child labor was so widespread in the United States that in 1910, almost 2 million children were in the workforce.
According to the article Child Labor in the Gulf Coast, it was as common for children in the workforce to be beaten and intentionally denied of education. As one witness has stated, I've seen them whip the children when they do not work. Of course, we don't want the child laborers people to know about this because they wouldn't understand that it is better off for these little people to be at work. They don't want to go to school. The children who grow up and can't read and write are better off than those who can, because as soon as they get a bit of education, they want to go strike for higher wages. You can look around all this place and you won't see a sickly child. It's wonderful how they do it, working as they do. They sometimes get off at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're just like cattle. If you just let them know when they have to work, everyone will tumble out of bed, and without washing or eating, they'll be at the plant in a jiffy.
According to the article Child Labor in the Gulf Coast, children were often injured by factory equipment. As one sympathetic worker said, "It's better not to have the children around because they are always in the way of the trucker and getting hurt." In 1917 through 1919, a study following families with working children found that children's incomes accounted for 23% on average of the family income.
One problem with the child labor laws was that they did not apply to the agricultural group. They were often omitted and exempted from the laws.
Some parents in New Jersey would send their children to glass factories as snappers, nearly from their own laziness. These children are sometimes too tired to return home and fall asleep in crates in the corner.
Reported in 1 year, 2,607 violations occurred in New York alone. Only 5 employers were prosecuted, and only 4 were convicted. It was discovered that thousands were working underage. The children's minds and bodies were deteriorated and mainly ended up in the prisons or asylums.
In response to the horrible conditions associated with child labor, reformers stepped forward to end the bad working conditions and outlaw child labor.
Albert Beveridge was the first person to introduce the national legislation for child labor. Although the bill was voted down, it did influence other initiatives.
Alexander McCullough helped with the legislation to raise the minimum age for working girls from 12 to 14. He was also involved in creating the Keating-Owen Bill and the Palmer-Owen Bill, those that worked towards abolishing child labor.
Mother Jones was an activist for the industrial workers for the world. She held a march in 1903 towards Washington, D.C., demanding the end of child labor.
Many other reformers, such as Grace Abbott, Jane Addams, Samuel Gompers, and Lewis Hine, all greatly contributed to the fight to end child labor.
The Keating-Owen Act was one of the most influential child labor laws. It developed important standards for child labor. No child under 16 could work in places such as mills and factories. It also established strict time restraints for working hours. This act would change the lifestyle of families all over the industrial areas.
Industrialization and economic growth led to rising incomes, which, with legislation, reduced the need for families to put their kids in the workforce. The participation of hard-working reformers and the rejection of bad working conditions by the general public resulted in the abolition of child labor.
Many times when things went wrong, their bosses often frowned. Many times those little